Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
I wanted to start the second part by talking about a physical example of a qubit. This has all been very abstract in abstract space, right? So let's talk about something that you might know a little bit about already, which is okay. Now this is something we all are familiar with. You're all used to Polaroid glasses or sunglasses and so on. So the light that comes out from these lights is what? Is it polarized, unpolarized? It's unpolarized, right? And then you have this idea of a polarizer, which is something which filters out different polarizations and picks a particular polar. So what is polarization? When I say it filters out different polarization, picks a particular polarization. Based on the angle?
Yeah, so light is basically alternating, like perpendicular magnetic wave and a perpendicular electric wave. Yeah. So if the light is propagating like this, the electric and magnetic waves can have like an infinite number of angles which they go through. So polarization basically fixes that angle at which they go.
Nice. Okay, good. So light is an electromagnetic wave, right? Which means it is comprised of, so the way I would put it is not perpendicular magnetic wave and electric wave, but oscillating electric fields and magnetic fields, right? And you're right, they have to oscillate in perpendicular directions. That is because they are constrained by what are called Maxwell's equations, right? Which govern how electric and magnetic fields behave. So they are constrained to oscillate along perpendicular directions. So now there are three directions in play. There's one direction where light is propagating, and then there are these directions in which the E and the B fields oscillate, right? So it turns out that light is what kind of wave? It's a transverse EM wave, which means that if it is propagating like this, and you can call this some direction, the E and B fields have to oscillate perpendicular to the direction. So the wave itself is like this, right? It's traveling here. But the oscillations, which is the magnitude of the E field and the B field, right? That's what oscillates. That has to oscillate in a perpendicular direction. So if I call this as Y, then the E and B fields should oscillate either along X or along Z, okay? And this direction, so you can pick either the E field or the B field. So if you pick the E field, that fixes the direction of the oscillation of the B field. So let me say this is E is electric field, B is magnetic field. Those of you who haven't seen this, don't worry, just take these as facts for now, but these can all be derived, right? That's the beauty of the theory of electromagnetism, that all of these things I'm stating as facts can all be derived from first principles, right? So I can pick, for example, the direction of the oscillation of the E field and say that this direction, so the direction of the oscillating E field, this is what I will call my polarization direction. If I pick this to be my polarization direction, that defines everything for me. I know the direction in which light is coming. I have fixed a particular polarization. That's nothing but the oscillation of the E field. Because of the constraint that these things have to be perpendicular, that automatically fixes the B field, the magnetic field oscillation. So I don't need to specify both. I pick either E or B and I define that to be the polarization of that EM wave, okay? So this is what it means to say light is polarized. It means you're constraining. So now you see, if this is my direction of propagation, yeah. Thank you. Thanks. So if this is my direction of propagation, like this, right? Then, so I think you said something about infinitely many possibilities. That's because the direction of propagation fixes for me a plane. It fixes a plane which is perpendicular to the direction of propagation, which is normal to the direction of propagation. And the E and B fields can oscillate along any direction in this plane, right? And so that's why I have that degree of freedom to choose from. If I have unpolarized light, it means it's a mixture of all possible directions of polarization in this plane, okay? But if I say that light is polarized, it means I have picked a particular direction for the E field, and that, like I said, constrains the B field and so on, okay? Now, since it's a plane, I have naturally the notion of two perpendicular directions again, right? So, I will pick, so that means the polarization has to be in a plane perpendicular to the direction of propagation, and a plane itself can be described in terms of two vectors. Two perpendicular vectors describe a plane for me, correct? So, when I specify the polarization, I can specify it, again going back to the analogy of your 3D real space, right? That's like picking a coordinate system. It's like saying this is my x, this is my y, this is my z. Then that defines any vector in that space for me. Similarly, I can pick what is called horizontal polarization and vertical polarization. So, I'll call this horizontal and vertical. So, this is just notation or a way to call. For example, I can say that this is vertically polarized. I define this to be vertically polarized. I define this to be horizontally polarized. I pick these two as my basic units to represent polarization. Then any arbitrary polarization direction can be written in terms of this and this. Written in what sense? Once again, in the sense of superposition, in the sense of taking a sum, and of course things could be scaled up, scaled down, etc., right? So, this has sort of the underlying math of this polarization mimics the math that we just now worked out for the qubits, right? Which is that you describe it in terms of a pair of such states, 0 and 1. I just now realized that I forgot to mention one important point in the previous thing, which is this perpendicular business. I mean, we discussed inner product, we discussed length. So, maybe now is a good time to talk about this, and I still have this here. So, yeah, this is the last bit which I should have mentioned before we went on the break. You see, in this real vector space, you have this notion of I cap, j cap and k cap, right? And you have I dot j is 0, right? That's what makes them perpendicular directions. J dot k, I dot I. So, can we reproduce these properties here? You see, what is taking the role of the I, j, k is these two, ket 0 and ket 1 now. And there's only two of them here because it's a two-dimensional space. It's not a three-dimensional space. So, now this, so the analogues of these properties would be that if I take the inner product of 0 and 1, I should get 0. So, can we quickly check that? So, what is ket 1 is 0, 1, remember, and ket 0 is 1, 0, but I have to take the transpose and complex conjugate, but this one has only real entries, so I just need to do the transpose, and then you do this. So, this is why I said when somebody asked me whether, why does 0 have to be defined as 1, 0 and 1 have to be defined as 0, 1, you can define it the other way. But once you pick one of them, for example, if I had picked 0 as 0, 1, my ket 1, which represents this is the logical 0 qubit, this is the logical 1 qubit, right? This should be perpendicular to this. this should be orthogonal to this. And orthogonal in the sense of this inner product. Because this is now my dot product. It's like saying if I pick in a 2D plane, if I pick an x-axis, that constrains for me what the y-axis is. Because y dot x, j dot I has to be 0. I can pick anything to be my x. But if I say something is x and something is y and you know in your head they're perpendicular directions, then picking one constrains the other. Okay? So in that sense, if I pick something to be qubit state 0, qubit state 1 is something that is orthogonal to that. Okay? And you can also check that 0 and 1 themselves have length 1. So their inner product with itself is 1. This is something for you to check. Okay? So in a sense, this ket 0 and ket 1 are like the two perpendicular axes of my vector space, of my qubit vector space. Okay? And so you see the transition from the classical to the quantum. Classical was just a single bit 0 and a single bit 1, right? Now I have moved to a vector space where the 0 and 1 still hold some importance. They define the vector space for me. They are the axes that define the space for me. But I am no longer limited to working with just the axis. I have access to the entire space. It's like if you come back to the polarization example now, so hopefully this is more clear now. So, oops. So let me draw this figure here, okay. Let me say that this is the direction of propagation. So, oops. The polarization is in this plane, okay. And in this plane, I define a horizontal and a vertical, right. So I can say that H is like my qubit 0, V is like my qubit state 1. So here is one physical realization of a qubit. Take polarized light, right? So you know what horizontal and vertical polarized are, in the sense there is one direction in which the E field is oscillating. It is perpendicular to the direction of propagation like this. If it's like this, it's horizontal polarized. And because these are two perpendicular directions, this is something you can do with a polarizer, right? So what does a polarizer do? Your sunglasses. It does exactly this, right? It picks a particular direction of polarization and it blocks out. It does not block out everything else, but primarily it blocks out the polarization that is exactly perpendicular to that. You understand? So when I take my Polaroid glasses, so I can think of this as having, so I don't know, you may see these kind of images somewhere. So it's like, you've done this, right? Where you've tilted your sunglasses and seen what happens. So what are you doing? So this has a particular axis. So it could be, for example, that this is, let's say that this axis is like a H direction, right? So this will primarily filter out, when I tilt it, it's the V direction. So it will primarily filter out all the light which is exactly polarized along the perpendicular direction. What about intermediate polarizations? You see, the intermediate polarizations, they make some angle with this, which means they have some component along this. They have some component along this. So they can't be completely filtered out. But if I look at a direction which is exactly 90 degrees, which is perpendicular to it, then that is completely filtered out. So this is how your polarizer normally functions. So I can think of a H and a V. I can also alternately think of two other directions. You know, I can think of, so if I write this, so I say this is V, this is H, I can think of 45-degree polarization. Okay? So these directions are sometimes called A and D. Cross polarization is also what they're called. So let's say that I start defining my 0 angle from here. Then this is 45. Then I pick another direction which is perpendicular to that. So let me call this as, let me just say 45. What angle would this be? So this is two other axes. So I can pick my physical qubit to be horizontal vertical, or I can say that in my lab I have only 45-degree polarizers. Okay, so 45-degree polarization is my qubit 0. 135-degree polarization is my qubit 1. So this is a freedom that the experimenter has. Once you have identified an appropriate system which has this kind of behavior, it's up to me to pick what is my qubit state 0 and what is my qubit state 1. So this in fact was the first kind of qubit that was realized in a lab. Okay, and this was realized, the first experiment that was done was actually using such polarized, so these are called polarization qubits. Okay, because you're picking the polarization direction of light as your basic unit. Okay. So this first experiment that was done actually in IBM sometime in the mid 90s, and the first experiment that was done was actually something called quantum key distribution. It was actually not a computing experiment, it was a communication experiment, because light naturally is a medium for communication, right? Today all our communication is happening, all your 4G, 5G, Jio, Airtel, whatever, all of that is happening through EM waves, right? So EM waves are natural for communication, but in all the communication that happens today, we are not tapping into the quantum states of light. We are still working with classical states of light. Okay? When I say quantum states of light, I mean states which have this kind of a unique behavior where you have a pair of perpendicular directions which can be represented in this vector space language, which then allow, you see, it's not enough to just have these orthogonal states. I must have the ability to make these superpositions. I must have the ability to do this, etc. How will you do that with polarization? Do you know? You can, so yes, but how do you, for example, go from a vertical or horizontal polarized to 45, 135-degree? You've heard of wave plates? No? Maybe that comes in class 12. Okay. So there are, yeah, so you can think of a polarizer itself, rotating your polarizer to pick out different axes, to prepare states which are essentially like combinations or superpositions of 0 and 1. But there are objects called wave plates which will do the job for you without you having to rotate a polarizer exactly. Okay? So you need to have the ability to have a pair of such perpendicular or orthogonal states. So these are what are called orthogonal states. And you need to have the ability to prepare superpositions of these orthogonal states. So for example, I have the ability to pick these as my qubits and then go to these states. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I start with 0 and 1, and let's say 0 and 1 are horizontal and vertical polarized. Okay. So remember that 0 is H and 1 is V. Okay. This is the notation in which I'm going to work. So now a general state, so this is what I call psi, remember, a general, so this is what I will call ket psi. So the general state of my qubit is of the form sum alpha 0 plus beta 1, and remember alpha are now complex numbers, and this is something that also naturally occurs because the EM wave has naturally inbuilt a notion of phase. Okay, and this polarization vector, when you write it down, is actually a complex vector. When you write down your full EM wave, down what the polarization vector is, you will see that it's actually a complex vector. So here is another place where complex numbers just come in naturally. That's what again makes it an ideal candidate for quantum computing, right? So this alpha and beta are complex numbers. So what should alpha and beta be for me to get to a 45 state? So let's say that I start with H and V. You should have the ability to make such states. Mathematically, how do I represent a state which is now the 45-degree state? Alpha? Sorry. Yeah, but you know more than everybody else. I'll ask the others. Huh? Sorry. Okay, so let's try to get a bit deeper into this alpha beta and we'll see this emerging. So the answer he's giving me is alpha and beta should be 1 by root 2. Okay, maybe some of you see why that should be the case. So the idea is that the 45-degree state is going to be of the form 0 plus 1 by root 2. This is, okay, maybe this notation is confusing, so I will write it as 1 by root 2 0 plus 1 by root 2 1. Okay, so why should this be? Why is this the case? So let's look a little bit into what this alpha and beta are. So remember we said alpha and beta are complex numbers and complex numbers have amplitude and phase. So let me now write a general psi as mod alpha e to the I phi 1, phi alpha, let me say 0, plus mod beta e to the I phi beta 1. Can I write this? All that I am doing is reading my alpha and beta in terms of an amplitude and phase. And I am calling this as phi sub alpha because this is the phase associated with alpha with this complex number and this is the phase associated with this complex number. If you take phi as 45, so yeah, exactly. So not exactly taking phi as 45 here in order to go to this. So there's a distinction. So we'll come to that. Now, quantum mechanically, what do these R and beta correspond to? You have, I don't know, you use a screw gauge, vernier calipers, right? These are all instruments. If you think about it, what are you doing? You're taking some physical object, a block of wood. You're trying to measure some property. It's width, breadth, whatever, length. And you're using an instrument to do the measurement. Now, the process of doing the measurement does not disturb your piece of wood, does it? That will be strange, right? It retains its length, it retains its width, it retains everything. Your instrument has some dial on it and you read out a number from that. That's your process of measurement. But your block of wood is a classical object, right? And measurement is just looking, essentially. And the act of looking doesn't change your classical object. But now you think about this polarized light, okay? I have prepared some arbitrary polarization. And it's your job to tell me what polarization I have prepared. So you have to measure polarization for me. How will you measure? So now you have to, the only way you can do this is by putting these filters. But then these filters are essentially breaking down your polarization into components, right? And when I put a particular filter, it's going to change the nature of the polarization itself. So that's why I said this is a very primitive but quintessential example of quantum measurement. The act of measuring a qubit is essentially like collapsing or decomposing the qubit into one of these perpendicular directions, into H and V. And when you do that, you get an outcome. I'll get H. In fact, I will get, so I can sort of alternately keep putting filters, right? I can put a vertical filter or I can put a horizontal filter. I'm just going to use this notation for that. So if I put a vertical filter, I'll get out some intensity of light, some fraction of light. That's like a probability. That's what you told me, right? So if I put a horizontal filter also, I will get some fraction of light. But in doing so, light that comes out is only vertically polarized. The light that comes out here will only be horizontally polarized. So you have changed the very attribute that you're trying to measure, which is polarization. So it turns out that this very basic example captures a lot of features of what we call quantum and what makes quantum computing hard. Because although you now have this nice idea of superposition and all of that, you have expanded your space. You're no longer just with 0 and 1, you're with all kinds of superpositions of 0 and 1. But you are limited finally by measurement. Because the act of measurement disturbs your state. You can only measure perpendicular directions. It's like taking a vector and collapsing it into x plane, projecting it into x, y, z. But when you project, you have lost information. You no longer have v vector. Once you project it down to the x-axis, you only have vx, x cap. You don't have any information about vy, vz. So actually, if I send light and you have to tell me what the polarization is, a single shot measurement will not do. So I have to keep sending you a steady stream of photons, light. You have to keep alternating between different filters. So it's like saying, I have tossed a coin and I've closed it. What's the outcome? Head or tail? Or I say that I have a coin, but now the coin is not a fair coin, it's a biased coin. Which means the probability of head need not be half, the probability of tail is not half. Okay? So it's a biased coin, I have tossed it, or I give you the coin also and I say it's a biased coin. You please tell me what is the bias. Which means what is the probability of getting a head with this coin, what is the probability of getting a tail. You cannot answer this question with a single coin toss. Because a single coin toss will give you one outcome, which is either head or tail. It doesn't tell you anything about the distribution. It doesn't tell you anything about the probability distribution. If I have to get a probability distribution experiment, like a coin toss or like measuring polarization, I have to repeat that experiment many times. I have to repeat it statistically significant number of times to get a distribution out of it. So that is the process of quantum measurement. It's not a single shot. It's not like looking into your vernier calipers or screw gauge and getting a number out of it. You have to repeat this process many times before you can get an outcome from that, right? Because finally, what are you going to get out of a quantum measurement? You are going to get probabilities. So if I prepare this quantum state for you, which is alpha 0 plus beta 1, which is like saying I prepare not 45 degrees but some arbitrary polarization, and it's your job to tell me what this alpha and beta are. You cannot do this with a single measurement. You will have to repeat this many times, sample these outcomes, see what fraction of time you get vertically polarized light, what fraction of time you get horizontally polarized light, and from that you deduce what these probabilities are. Okay? So that I think covers the other keyword that we had. So I'll just do one final last minutes or so, which is I wanted to see how to get to this answer, right? So when we said 45 degrees light, the answer that was given was it's 1 over root 2 0 plus 1 over root 2 1. So how do we get this? Is there a systematic way that I can write down what are these coefficients for some qubit state that I want to prepare? So let's do this. Any questions with this polarization measurement? Okay. So you know that I can represent an arbitrary complex number in terms of its amplitude phase like this. Now I have told you an additional piece of information, which is that this mod alpha squared and mod beta squared are probabilities, right? You see, that now puts a constraint on what this alpha and beta can be. Mathematically, for a vector space, there is no constraint. I can prepare any arbitrary such complex combination, and that's an element of the vector space. But physically, because now these are measurable quantities and there is an outcome, there's a physical meaning to this. How we saw length, right? It has a physical meaning. The norm of the vector has a physical meaning of length. In this case, this sum mod alpha beta squared So what is this, what is actually, so let's do this. So let me take the inner product of psi with itself. So you start from this psi. Can you work this out for me? How will I work this out? So I have written for you the ket vector. So how will I write the dual vector now? How will I write the bra vector? Okay, so you're writing in this notation, right? So this is alpha, beta, okay. But you're forgetting something. Huh. So, how will I represent it like this position? Can I represent it? I want to write it like this, in this notation. So if you think about it, this is alpha star 1, 0 plus beta star 0, 1, which is alpha star, the dual corresponding to 0. Did I say that right? Yeah. 0, right? Right? So now you will see why we work with this bracket notation. Because every time I don't want to be going and writing down matrices like this. I don't want to be writing down columns and rows. So I'm going to write this as alpha star 0 plus beta star 1, alpha 0 plus beta 1, and I'm going to read off the answer because what? We just said that certain things are orthogonal, certain things are perpendicular. Yeah? So now how do I do this? I have to do term wise, no? I have to do this term wise product. So 0 and 0, when I take the inner product, what happens? 1 and 0? 0 and 1? 1 and 1? So, two terms get eliminated and I end up with what should this sum be? Why? Because this should form a probability distribution. So this tells me that any qubit state, so remember I said that a qubit state is a qubit system is a two-dimensional complex linear vector space, but qubit states have an additional constraint. They cannot be any vector in this 2D complex linear vector space. No. They have to be vectors whose norm is 1, whose length is 1, because their term-wise amplitudes in terms of the 0 and 1 should form a probability distribution. So the state of a qubit is any vector of length 1 in a complex linear vector space. Okay? So this finally I have described for you fully what a qubit is mathematically. Now let's go ahead and try to understand this this notation a little bit. So shall I erase this? I hope this is clear. So now because I have this constraint of mod alpha squared plus mod beta squared is 1, can you think of certain functions? Okay, yeah, you had a question.
Using the equations we now got, we'll get mod of alpha and mod of beta as half 1 by root 2, but not alpha and beta as 1 by root 2.
No. I said probabilities are mod alpha squared and mod beta squared.
Yes, ma'am.
So if it's a 50-50 scenario,
Mod alpha is equal to 1 by root 2, but alpha
mod alpha squared is half.
so mod alpha is 1 by root 2.
Correct.
So there it's alpha of
Exactly. So
vector.
yeah, I understand what you're asking. So what happened to?
That was my doubt.
Yeah. So we'll come to that, but I don't have time for that. So what happened to the phase when I wrote this particular thing, right? Okay. So we'll come to that. So when I say mod alpha squared plus mod beta squared is 1, can you think of something from your trigonometry class maybe which has this property? Thank you. So cos squared theta plus sin squared theta is 1. So you know what? I don't like working with complex numbers. So I'm going to say mod alpha is cos theta. So then what should mod theta, beta be? Sin theta. So now you see I represent my qubit state as cos theta e to the I phi alpha. So maybe this answers your question about the 45 degree already. The 45 degree state with the polarization that we were looking at is a particular example of this, where theta is, so that 45 degrees, basically the theta 45, and both the phases being in sync you say, but what is it actually? Both the phases being 0, right? Okay. So now you said in sync and out of sync. So let's come to in sync and out of sync. You see, I have now two phases sitting here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out one of these phases. I'm going to pull out e to the I phi alpha. So then I have cos theta 0 plus e to the I phi theta minus phi alpha, let's say. Right? Yes? So I had two phase values here. So you see the amplitude part is now just a single meter. It's just theta. Just the theta fixed for me these probability amplitudes. You see that? But there's still two phases sitting there. Now I have split up those two phases. One has come out. Okay? Now this phase is something that applies to both the terms. So this is what we will call global phase or an overall phase. And then you said something about in sync, out of sync, in phase, out of phase. What captures all that? This term. Because this is now a phase difference. This is a difference of two phases. So this is what we will call a relative phase. Now, it turns out quantum mechanically, this overall phase is not a measurable quantity. It's not something that we can observe. So this is a degree of freedom which does not define for us a different state. So we can only define states up to this overall phase. So this is something that I don't even need, because it's not something that I can measure. It's not something that I can use to distinguish between different states. So this overall phase goes out of the picture. So actually, to represent a qubit, I need two real numbers. This is where I'm going to stop. I need two real numbers. I need this theta. And the theta essentially tells me what the probability of the qubit being in 0 is and what the probability of the qubit being in state 1 is, right? Because the probability of being in state 0 is what? Cos squared theta. The probability of being in state 1 is sin squared theta. And what is the second number that I need to describe the qubit? I need this difference of two phases. I need this phi beta minus phi alpha. I can simply call it a phi. Okay? So I have two angles essentially, theta and phi, which describe for me the state of a qubit. One tells me the relative probabilities of getting outcome 0 and 1. The other tells me what is the relative phase between 0 and 1. So this is a case where you don't have a relative phase between 0 and 1. So that's what somebody said, in sync or something. Yeah. So you don't have a relative phase between 0 and 1. Okay, so I think I should stop here and we should have a break before the next lecture. Questions? Yeah, this is as far as we got today, but hopefully you learned something of the math of qubits and so on. Yeah.
How do we decide if something is in phase or not in phase?
How do we decide if something is in phase or out of phase? That's a good question. So essentially you're asking, how do we measure phase?
Yes.
Okay. The way we measure this phase is not directly. So what we will do is we will rotate our state in such a way that the phase becomes something which is observable. I'll tell you how, for example. So think of this state. So you had a plus here, right? Now I can make another state where this is a minus. What state is that in terms of angles? That's your 135 state. And you know, at least geometrically looking at that, or physically, that the 45 and 135 are perpendicular directions. So that is how I will measure the relative phase. I will measure whether it's 45 degree polarized or 135 degree polarized. That will tell me. So you see the negative sign, what is the phase angle there?
Pi by
Think.
pi.
Pi or pi by 2?
Pi.
So the phase angle is pi. So when the relative phase is 0, when I say phase, I mean relative phase now. The relative phase is 0, they are in sync. If the relative phase is pi, they are exactly out of sync. So these two states are orthogonal states because they come with a plus or minus sign. Minus is the 135 state. Again, this is a measurement you can do to distinguish between these two because they are exactly perpendicular directions like we drew it over there. So that's how you will measure. That's one way of measuring.
What does relative phase actually signify between the horizontal vector and the vertical one?
So what does it signify? Well, basically, I don't know how to answer this exactly without, the relative phase basically gives me two distinct states, right? In the sense, whether they are in sync or out of sync corresponds to two different.
Can you give an example of relative phase in the polarized light?
That's exactly what I've done here. So you have this 1/3, so you have this thing, no? So we saw this, right? You have horizontal, vertical, and you have 45, 130. Now, when I make superpositions of horizontal and vertical, I can make the superposition by including this phase phi. So basically, when I make a superposition, what do? I'm picking some theta and I'm picking some phi. So if I pick that phi to be 0, you will see that I'm essentially in this part of the plane, if you think about it. If I pick my phi to be pi, then in some sense I'm spanning this part. So it's basically I'm preparing two different superpositions, right? So quantitatively what it corresponds to will depend on the particular physical system, right? In this case, it's just different polarization degrees. But say in the case of spin, for example, in the case, I don't want to go into spin and things. Anyway, so let's stop with this. So it basically corresponds to distinct polarizations of your light. You can think of it that way.
So we can, as a like in complex plus main argument, it helps us identify which quadrant we should take it in.
In a sense, yes. In a sense, it will identify for you.
Which quadrant?
You could say that.
Like
you could say that. Yeah.
In the
So actually, I wanted to complete the lecture with a geometric picture of a qubit, which I haven't done. And the geometric picture is not a plane actually. If you think about it, what did I say? You need two real numbers, theta and phi, to define a qubit. What does this remind you of? Angle coordinates. Three dimensions. Y sphere, Y cone. So think about the length. The length is what, when I describe a qubit, all these qubit states have length 1, we said, no? They all have inner product with themselves is 1. So there is some symmetry there. Unit circle, you just said 3D. So a qubit can exactly be mapped to a unit sphere in 3 dimensions. In fact, this sphere, I don't know, the next lecturer is not here, I'm not sure, is called a Bloch sphere, okay? Bloch, I'll just write down the word here, you can look it up. So this is what is called a Bloch sphere. Yeah.
So in one step you took mod alpha as cos theta.
Hmm.
Cos theta can be negative, but mod alpha can be. So how do you justify that?
Mod alpha is basically the amplitude of the complex number, correct? So, so I am going to define, I have not defined for you a range for, right? So the range that I will define for theta, so basically I will actually take theta to be a half angle. Maybe we'll discuss this offline because but the answer to this is essentially that you pick a range for theta. So what is the range of theta that you will pick to make it, to keep it positive? 0 to pi by 2. Instead, what I will do is the canonical way of defining this is to actually define these as half angles. Okay? And then what will theta range from? No. 0 to pi, right? So this block sphere that one was talking about, so maybe one can quickly show that. So we said that these two angles, theta and phi, with the length being 1, defines for me a unit sphere in the space. So let me draw unit sphere in 3D space, okay? And I'm going to mark out some point in this as my ket 0 because it's with respect to that I have my angles described. So this north pole of the sphere I'll call ket 0. And this angle is what I'll call theta. So theta will go from 0 to pi, but the mod alpha here will actually be cos theta by 2 and sin theta by 2. Thanks, that's a very good question. So yeah, this is how you make sure that things are positive. But since we are here, the north pole is ket 0, where is ket 1? You guys, what is that? What is theta and what is phi? So look at this expression, sorry, so look at this expression now. So let me put the half angles. So this is what you've got. Oops. So this is what you need to look at, okay? And I'll get rid of this because we've said that the overall phase doesn't matter. So I will call this phi, right? So I have identified ket 0 here. And I'm starting to take theta like this. So this is some arbitrary state psi for me, this point out here, okay? So where would ket 1 be? The answer is correct, but I was just waiting to see if so this is my origin. So this south pole is where I have ket 1. Because what should happen? If I have to go from ket 0 to ket 1, how should my theta change? It should go from 0 to pi. So exactly, so I start with ket 0, which is theta 0. I rotate by pi and I get ket 1. Is that clear to everyone? So that's why the answer was south pole. Now you can have fun. You can start thinking about where I have the 45-degree polarized state, where will I have the 135-degree polarized state on this sphere. And last but not the least, we can note that classical bit has just 2 allowed values on this sphere. It's a classical binary variable. So it can either take 0 or 1. But now my quantum bit, because I have mapped the states onto the surface of sphere like this, these sequence of arguments, can access any point on the surface of. So this is the power of superposition. That you have gone from just this binary valuable to a vector space where you can now access actually an infinity of states like this on the surface of the sphere, as opposed to just a pair of states. But like I said, it comes with its own flip side, which is measurement. So when you measure, you can only measure orthogonal directions, right? You can only measure orthogonal polarizations. You can only measure orthogonal states. So this then constrains for you how you can put in information and how you can read out information from your quantum device. Okay, stop here. Sorry? Then? You tell me, where is phi? Exactly. So you've all done 3D spherical polar coordinates in your saying yes. So, sorry, project down to, so let me call this x, y and z, okay? That's just some notation, but so this is phi. I project down to the xy plane and that is phi. Yeah. Yes, in a sense, yeah. Yes, indeed. Exactly, yeah. Okay, well, good. Glad, I hope there was some non-zero transmission of information back and forth, yeah. Okay, thank you guys, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for investing your time and taking us into the world of quantum bits, electromagnetic waves, and propagation and all. And the lecture was wonderful and informative. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.